At some point, you have to stop blaming time, luck, people, or circumstances and look directly at the one factor that's been present in every outcome of your life: you. Not your intentions, not your potential, your actions. Facing yourself feels difficult because it strips away comfort, but comfort has never built a strong future. If you're serious about changing where your life is headed as we move into 2026, this is where it starts. Self-honesty is uncomfortable because it removes the protective layer of excuses that most people rely on to stay psychologically comfortable. Excuses are not always loud or obvious. They often sound reasonable, responsible, even mature. I'm waiting for the right time. I have more responsibilities than others. Things will improve when conditions change. These explanations soften the tension between where you are and where you want to be. But when you're honest with yourself, those explanations collapse. You are forced to confront the fact that many of your limitations are not imposed on you. They are tolerated by you. That realization creates discomfort because it shifts the focus from external barriers to internal choices. And once the focus shifts, avoidance is no longer an option. When excuses disappear, responsibility becomes unavoidable. You begin to see patterns clearly: the workouts you skipped, the skills you delayed building, the difficult conversations you avoided, the standards you lowered when effort felt inconvenient. Self-honesty strips away the story that circumstances are the primary cause of stagnation and replaces it with a harder truth: that consistency was missing, discipline was negotiable, and comfort was often prioritized over progress. This doesn't mean circumstances don't matter, but it does mean they don't decide everything. Accepting that truth can feel heavy because it removes the emotional escape route. You can no longer blame the day, the mood, or the situation without knowing you're lying to yourself. This discomfort intensifies because self-honesty exposes the gap between intention and behavior. Most people believe their intentions define them, but reality responds only to actions. When you look honestly at your life, you see outcomes, not plans. You see what your habits have produced, not what you hoped they would produce. That realization can feel confronting, even discouraging, because it challenges the identity you've built around potential rather than execution. The mind resists this confrontation because it threatens self-image, but growth begins only when image gives way to evidence. Self-honesty also removes the illusion of being special enough to escape the rules of cause and effect. It reveals that effort, repetition, and restraint apply to everyone equally. There are no exceptions for talent, intelligence, or good intentions. Once this is acknowledged, the work becomes unavoidable and personal. You are no longer waiting to be rescued by motivation or circumstances. You are required to govern your behavior deliberately. That level of accountability feels uncomfortable because it demands maturity, patience, and endurance, and it forces you to sit with the truth that the life you are living is, in large part, a reflection of the standards you have accepted. Discipline feels heavy before it feels free because, at the beginning, it directly opposes the habits that have been running your life on autopilot. When you first impose structure, limits, and standards on yourself, it feels restrictive, unnatural, and exhausting. Your mind interprets discipline as loss of comfort, loss of flexibility, loss of immediate relief. The routines feel rigid, the effort feels forced, and the progress feels slow. This early resistance is not a sign that discipline is wrong. It is proof that your previous patterns were unstructured enough to feel familiar, even if they were costing you in ways you quietly ignored. The weight of discipline comes from asking more of yourself than you are used to giving consistently. Waking up on time, training when energy is low, focusing without distraction, and following through without emotional negotiation all require deliberate effort. In this phase, discipline doesn't reward you with relief. It demands endurance. Results are not yet visible, but the demand on your attention and behavior is immediate. This imbalance is where most people quit, because they mistake the absence of short-term payoff for failure, rather than understanding it as the normal cost of rebuilding control over their actions. Over time, something shifts. The very behaviors that once felt heavy begin to reduce friction in your life. Decisions become simpler because standards are already set. Energy improves because your body adapts to consistency. Mental clarity increases because fewer choices are left to impulse. Discipline slowly replaces chaos with predictability, and predictability creates stability. What once required willpower begins to require routine. The weight does not disappear all at once. but it redistributes, moving away from constant internal debate and towards structured effort that no longer drains you the same way. Freedom emerges not from doing whatever you want, but from no longer being controlled by what you feel in the moment. Discipline creates freedom by removing dependence on motivation, mood, and external validation. When you trust yourself to act regardless of discomfort, you gain confidence rooted in reliability rather than emotion. Your time becomes more usable, your focus more durable, and your progress more measurable. What initially felt like restriction reveals itself as capacity, the capacity to choose long-term outcomes over short-term relief, to direct your energy instead of reacting to circumstances, and to build a life that functions under pressure rather than collapsing when conditions are imperfect. Avoidance strengthens weakness because whatever you refuse to face is allowed to operate without resistance. When a problem is avoided, it does not stay the same size. It adapts, spreads, and quietly shapes your behavior. Missed responsibilities turn into habits. Unaddressed fears become limits. Delayed decisions accumulate into pressure. Avoidance feels like relief in the moment because it removes immediate discomfort, but that relief is temporary and deceptive. The cost is paid later in reduced confidence, narrowed options, and a growing sense that certain areas of life are out of your control, even though they remain directly connected to your choices. Each time avoidance is chosen, a pattern is reinforced. The mind learns that discomfort is something to escape rather than tolerate. This training weakens resilience because resilience is built only through exposure. Difficult conversations become harder the longer they are postponed. Physical effort feels heavier when the body is underused. Mental focus deteriorates when attention is constantly redirected away from challenge. Over time, avoidance reshapes identity, turning short-term coping into long-term limitation. You stop seeing yourself as someone who confronts problems and begin to see yourself as someone who works around them. Avoidance also distorts self-perception. It encourages rationalization, where inaction is justified as patience, timing, or strategy. These explanations sound reasonable, but they mask fear of effort, failure, or accountability. When avoidance becomes habitual, it creates a false sense of complexity around simple actions. Tasks feel overwhelming not because they are difficult, but because they have been left unattended long enough to accumulate emotional weight. The longer something is avoided, the more intimidating it feels, even when the solution itself remains straightforward. Weakness grows strongest where standards are lowest. Avoidance lowers standards quietly, without requiring a conscious decision. You begin accepting outcomes you once would have considered unacceptable. Energy drops, urgency fades, and discipline erodes, not through collapse, but through neglect. Confrontation, on the other hand, immediately reverses this trend. Facing discomfort does not guarantee success, but it restores agency. Each time you act despite resistance, you reduce the power of avoidance and rebuild trust in your ability to respond rather than retreat. Strength is not created by eliminating difficulty, but by proving to yourself that difficulty does not dictate your behavior, and that you are capable of meeting demands directly instead of shrinking your life to avoid them. Emotional control is a skill, not a trait, because no one is born with stable reactions under pressure. What looks like calmness or emotional strength in others is usually the result of repetition, restraint, and learned response patterns developed over time. Emotions arise automatically, but how you respond to them is shaped by training. Without deliberate practice, emotions dictate behavior by default. Frustration turns into impulsive decisions. Stress leads to avoidance or aggression. Fatigue lowers standards. When reactions are unmanaged, life becomes reactive rather than directed, driven by momentary feelings instead of intentional action. The difficulty with emotional control is that it is often misunderstood as suppression. Suppression ignores emotions and forces them underground, where they resurface later with greater intensity. Control, by contrast, is awareness followed by choice. It is recognizing an emotional spike without allowing it to steer behavior. This requires mental discipline, especially in moments where reacting would provide immediate relief. Choosing restraint feels uncomfortable at first because it denies the nervous system the release it expects. Over time, however, restraint builds tolerance. You learn that emotions peak and pass, and that you do not need to act on every internal signal. Like any skill, emotional control improves through exposure to difficulty rather than avoidance of it. Stressful situations become training grounds instead of threats. Each time you pause instead of reacting, you reinforce a new pattern. Each time you act according to standards rather than mood, you strengthen self-trust. This process is slow and often invisible, which is why many people abandon it. There are no dramatic milestones, only incremental improvements in response time, clarity, and recovery. But these small gains compound into stability, especially under pressure. Emotional control also plays a direct role in consistency. Long-term progress requires showing up when conditions are imperfect. Motivation fluctuates, confidence wavers, and outcomes are delayed. Without emotional regulation, these fluctuations become excuses. With regulation, they become background noise. You stop negotiating with temporary feelings and start honoring long-term commitments. This shift changes how challenges are perceived. Difficulty becomes expected rather than alarming. Setbacks become data rather than verdicts. Emotional control does not eliminate stress, but it prevents stress from hijacking decisions, allowing effort to remain steady even when circumstances are not, and creating a form of strength that is reliable because it is practiced, deliberate, and earned. Consistency beats intensity every time because progress responds to repetition, not bursts of effort. Intensity feels powerful because it creates a sense of urgency and emotional commitment, but it is difficult to sustain. It relies heavily on motivation, which fluctuates with energy, mood, and circumstances. When motivation fades, intensity collapses and progress stalls. Consistency, by contrast, operates independently of excitement. It requires showing up even when the work feels ordinary, uncomfortable, or unrewarding. This steady approach may feel slow, but it creates momentum that does not depend on emotional peaks. Most meaningful outcomes are built through accumulation. Physical strength develops through regular training, not sporadic overexertion. Skills improve through repeated practice, not occasional obsession. Financial stability grows through steady habits, not rare windfalls. Intensity often leads to burnout because it demands more than the system can recover from. Consistency respects limits and works within them, allowing adaptation to occur. Small actions repeated daily may seem insignificant in isolation, but over time, they reshape capability, confidence, and capacity in ways that intense efforts rarely sustain. Consistency also reduces decision fatigue. When behaviors are habitual, they no longer require negotiation. The question shifts from whether you will act to how you will act. This simplifies execution and preserves mental energy. Intensity, on the other hand, requires constant emotional activation. It demands that you repeatedly convince yourself to care deeply, which is exhausting. Consistency replaces persuasion with structure. Structure creates reliability, and reliability creates trust in your ability to follow through, regardless of mood. There is also a psychological advantage to consistency. Repeated action reinforces identity. When you act regularly, you begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. This identity supports future behavior, making effort feel more natural over time. Intensity does the opposite when it collapses. After a short burst of effort followed by inaction, self-trust erodes. You become less likely to believe your own commitments. Consistency rebuilds that trust incrementally, even when progress feels slow. Long-term growth depends on durability, not drama. Life rarely provides perfect conditions, and systems that require high emotional output fail under stress. Consistent effort survives interruptions, setbacks, and imperfect days. It allows for adjustment without abandonment. When intensity fades, consistency remains, quietly compounding results through patience and repetition, shaping outcomes that are stable because they were built gradually rather than forced quickly. Truth is the foundation of real self-improvement because growth depends on accurate feedback. Without truth, effort is misdirected and progress becomes guesswork. Many people believe they are improving simply because they are thinking about change, consuming information, or setting intentions. Truth interrupts this illusion by forcing a comparison between behavior and outcome. It asks uncomfortable questions about what is actually happening rather than what is hoped for. When truth is avoided, self-improvement becomes performative, built on narratives instead of results, and disconnected from the realities that determine success or failure. Honest evaluation exposes limitations without assigning drama or blame. It reveals what is working, what is not, and where effort is being wasted. This clarity is often mistaken for negativity, but it is the opposite. Truth does not judge, it informs. When you acknowledge gaps in skill, discipline, or follow-through, you gain the ability to address them directly. Without this acknowledgement, the same mistakes repeat under different names. Progress stalls not because of lack of potential, but because errors are never fully confronted. Truth removes ambiguity and replaces it with direction. Truth also anchors expectations in reality. Many people abandon growth because they expect fast results from inconsistent effort. When outcomes fall short, discouragement sets in. Truth recalibrates this process. It connects results to inputs in a clear and unemotional way. If effort is minimal, results will be minimal. If consistency is lacking, progress will be unstable. This understanding eliminates confusion and resentment. You stop feeling wronged by outcomes and start adjusting inputs deliberately. Improvement becomes a process of refinement rather than frustration. Real self-improvement requires confronting uncomfortable patterns repeatedly. Truth does not offer reassurance, but it offers reliability. It remains steady regardless of mood or circumstance. When you align with truth, you stop negotiating with excuses and start measuring actions. You become less attached to identity and more focused on execution. This shift is critical because identity can protect dysfunction, while truth exposes it. Growth accelerates not because the process becomes easier, but because energy is no longer wasted defending false narratives. Truth-based improvement also builds resilience. When setbacks occur, they are analyzed rather than personalized. Failure becomes information rather than a verdict. This mindset allows effort to continue without emotional collapse. Truth does not promise comfort, but it provides stability. It creates a framework where progress is earned through alignment between intention and action, and where change becomes sustainable because it is rooted in what is real rather than what is convenient. If you want real change, it starts with how honestly you are willing to look at yourself. Not with blame, not with self-criticism, but with clarity. The future is shaped less by what you want and more by what you repeatedly do. Discipline, emotional control, consistency, and truth are not abstract ideas. They are daily decisions. As you move forward, stop waiting to feel ready, motivated, or confident. Those feelings follow action, not the other way around. Choose standards over comfort. Choose structure over impulse. Face what you've been avoiding and commit to doing the work quietly, consistently, and without negotiation, because the life you build next will reflect the level of responsibility you accept now.